Cool. So I want to dive in and start with just a couple of plugins that I think are super helpful for just getting design systems up and off the ground. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. Make sure everybody can see that and hear me. If we could just get a quick yes in the chat that you guys can hear me and see my screen just fine. Awesome. Very cool. So a few of the ones that I want to start with, a great place to start is that if you are just working on colors and things like that, or you're working on typography or anything, and you're just building out as you go, it's possible that you weren't making styles the whole time that you were doing that. That's okay. You can go back and actually retroactively build those, and there's some great plugins to help with that as well. One of them that I love is called Styler by Andrei Lenku. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. What this will do is this will actually extract colors, typography, images, anything like, any type of fills, and actually extract them based on their layer names and generate styles for you automatically. So a good example would be something like, let's hop back to office hours. There we go. Cool. So I've got 4 color fills that I have right here. These are not set up as styles or anything like that, but what I can do is if I select these layers and I'm gonna open up and run this plugin, again, you can quick run plugins from the menu by hitting Command / or Control /, which will pop open the menu. You can just type in the name of the plugin if you have it installed. So in this case, I'm just gonna type in Styler, generate styles. And right up there, you'll see you get a little notification of what was created, updated, or renamed, changed. And now we have 4 color styles really quickly created. You can do this with any number of styles that you have. This also works with fills, which is really cool, with images, because images are fills, much like a color, but it's going to be bitmap data instead of the actual image itself, instead of the actual color itself. So got a folder of some corgis right here. So if I were to grab some of these corgis, drop them into my file, awesome. You can see you can just drag and drop, and you'll also just get them all right on the page. If we run that command again with those selected, so now if we just say, and you can rerun commands really quick with Option Command P as well. That'll just quickly rerun the last plugin that you ran. It's pretty great. And you'll see here we now have now got some fill styles for each of those corgis that we added here. One thing you'll note though is that those corgis, the names on those are not too useful. Those are just the layer names that came in, which were based on the file name. So another plugin that I cannot live without these days is called the Design System Organizer. So this plugin, let's go ahead and run it. Design System Organizer is basically like the styles panel, but with a ton of added benefits and just things that you can do really well as far as batch organization and things like that. So a good example, you'll see here, if you open it up, it's gonna start with showing you any components you have. This is a brand new file, so we don't have any components in here right now, but if I hop over to fills or paint styles, you'll see here that we have all of those colors as well as those corgi images that I had here. What's nice about this is that if I wanted to group all of those corgi fills together, to do that over here in the local styles panel, I'm gonna have to do that one at a time. I have to go to each style. And if you wanna group them, you can basically put in a name at the front of that, like corgi / and then maybe this is just like cute corgi. You'll see there that I would have to do this for every single style as we went through it. What's cool about Design System Organizer is I can just quickly select those corgis. I'm holding down Command as I'm doing this too, to just multi-select like that. I can say group and just call it corgi, and bam, right away, you'll see in the styles panel there, all of those were renamed super fast. And you can do this at scale. You can group things, you can ungroup things, you can re-nest groups as well too. So, and I can run this again for colors as well. Maybe I want to have brand like that. And now we've got some nice things all set up like that. And then
how would I ungroup these, Anthony? Like,
oh, it's
yeah,
fantastic.
I'm wondering how you ungroup.
If you select one of these groups that you have here, what you can do is there's an option, I believe it's in this ... menu. You'll see here we got ungroup, and that will just take them away right out of the group like that.
Awesome.
Nice and easy. Yeah. Super cool. So that's some great ways to work with things like fills. So anything like colors or image fills, which are great for doing quick swapping for things like avatars and stuff. And then another great part of this is doing this for type styles too. You can manually go in and set up all your type styles. There's some great websites. I'll see if I can find an example. I'll post it into the chat too as well, for setting up different type styles, or what we call vertical rhythms. These are basically the idea that your different font sizes and your metrics, so your things like your line heights and your baselines of your typography, are going to create something that's visually pleasing for the eye. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything is mathematically perfect either. You got to remember that lots of the things that we do from a design perspective can sometimes there's a visual balance that might be even different than a technical balance. But for the most part, if you want to get a head start on this kind of stuff, there's another great plugin that we have that is just called Typescales. So this is created by Marvin Brun or Bruns. Again, man, I got to get better at my names. This will actually set up some Typescales for you very quickly as well, too. So if you've got, if we run that plugin really fast, let's say we say Typescales, you'll see you get a pretty nice interface for actually setting up a base font size. So this is what you want, let's say your body copy or your default copy size to be. And then from there, you get some pretty great scales that are built in. There are some rather mathematical scales, as well as some that start to use some irrational numbers, where you start to get some more interesting scales that are going to occur. The golden ratio too is also, you know, there's some other ones, Le Corbusier, a few other very interesting scales that you can do here. And it'll generate some things, it'll generate some examples for you to look at. And then you'll see here that you can scale up and scale down, and you can even round the values too if you don't want to have these crazy long floating integer decimal points for all of your type styles. Every browser.
Anthony, could you explain this scales up, scales down? I'm wondering, is that the number of like heading, like sometimes you'll see design systems with like heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4, heading, there's like a lot, and maybe it's too complex. You don't need that many. Is that kind of the idea here?
That is exactly what we're looking at. So this blue one right here, this is our base size, right? So this is the one that we set to our normal size. And we can choose how many scales up or scales down we want from that. So maybe we only want 2 heading sizes above our main size. Type in 2, now we've got just those 2 sizes. This is also giving us 2 smaller sizes. Again, I would say 10, maybe pushing it quite a bit from an accessibility perspective. So maybe I just want 1 scale down from that as well. So now I've got fewer sizes. Again, I'm a big proponent of fewer steps to the next change is always better. So something like if you want to, if you're trying to highlight something or make something a heading, I say take 1 property and change it often if you can, meaning that like make something either a different font size or change the weight or change the style on it. Don't change multiple things at once, you know, that kind of a thing is a great way to just make sure that you're being, let's say, responsible with the amount of types, sizes, and styles that you're introducing. So here we go, we can go ahead and we can generate this. And that's just gonna quickly create a quick frame with those styles on it. Now, again, using this with that styler that we had a minute ago, if I just grab those type layers and run that styler generate styles again, boom, we've got 4 type styles already set up, ready to go. So you're already on your way to having some basics of a design system as far as assuming you'd already done a fair amount of work or something like that, and you wanted to just go back and retroactively make those styles and then quickly adjust the naming conventions and clean up a bunch of work. So it'd also work if you were importing from maybe a sketch file that you weren't even using styles over there, right? So we will try to like convert sketch file styles, but this would actually, even if your sketch file didn't have that, you could pull that in and then generate the styles directly in Figma as well. So.
Yeah, this is incredible. So on the previous stream that I was working on a design system, I decided to go for the golden ratio one. I read up all on like the musical notes and how they use like the different musical scales to be able to relate these things. Anthony, I wish I had this Typescales plugin. Like that would have made my life so much easier. Like that's so cool. I love that.
It's a super powerful one. I'm just going to drop another type scale in here real quick too, just so that we have something that has maybe a little bit more size variation to work with as well. So,
ooh, can you give us some golden ratio? I do it. I live for it. It's huge. What a big boy.
Maybe we'll go 3 sizes up from there. There we go. That's much better. Round those values too. Awesome. something a little bit better to work with. And then I'll quickly rerun that. Again, so I'm going to select those type layers, run generate styles, and boom, we've got type styles ready to go in like 10 seconds.
That's awesome. Okay, I'm going to take this, but I don't want you to stop screen sharing just yet because we had a few questions specifically for you. Leandro's asking, can you demo how to import sketch styles?
Yeah, so by default, let me see if I've got I think I've got a file that we can use here, probably in here. I think I've got a Carbon design system file. Awesome, very cool. So by default, and I'm just gonna pop out to another, I'm gonna go back to our files interface here. Figma will do its best to, let me just make sure I get Figma. Awesome, very cool. It's going to do its best to try and interpret your sketch styles if you've already got them in your file. So for example, I've got a the Carbon design system file, so IBM's design system as a sketch file here. If I import this file, again, you can click like just the little import button right here, or you can just drag a file from your desktop and drop it directly into any project or into your drafts folder too, if you're not ready to share it in a project. This is going to go ahead and actually import that entire file. This is a rather large design system, and it's done. So there we go, cool. If I go into this file, you're gonna see, and remember, this was a sketch file that's now converted into a Figma file. Those styles are already set up automatically, right? So those were styles that existed in the sketch file. Those are gonna actually get converted in. We'll do the similar work with symbols too. So symbols will get converted to components. Instances of symbols will be converted into instances of those components. There is some complexity when you start getting into like nested symbol overrides and how we try to interpret those, or if you're using custom plugins to set some of this stuff up, like if you have custom sketch plugins, the easiest thing to do is try to get those flattened into like normal sketch styles and then save your file, try to import it, something like that. And again, you'll see here that your naming conventions may not be perfect. So this could be a great opportunity to, like, once you pull in that file, that design system organizer plugin is going to make your life a lot easier as far as batch cleanup, right? So maybe you open this up, you go to your styles panel, and you say, okay, great, we've got some icon styles. I want to group those. Those are going to all be under a group just called icons. And then I want to actually do take these interactive styles here and group those under, interactivity. And then before you know it, when you're going to use your styles, you've now got, it's like if I go and I try to like select a style now, there we go. You'll see that I've got those groupings automatically right now. It's like icons, interactivity, things like that. So we will do our best to interpret that. One other thing to remember is that there's a little bit more flexibility with what you can do in Figma styles as far as we decouple typography styles from color styles, which has a few advantages as well. So what I mean by that is that you don't need a separate style. Like if you have a typeface, like where you're just writing something out, and you need that in like 5 different colors. In Sketch, you would have to set that up as 5 different styles to have those as different colors. We've actually gone a different route and said that you can set type styles independently of color styles. So for example, if I were to just name this style real quick, brand 1 heading, you'll see here that I can set that typography style separately from the color style here. So now I can actually go in and I can set a different style for my color, which can feel a little bit more Wild West as far as like the two are independent of each other. But what you're actually getting here is a little bit more connectivity to your design system, in the sense that I could use my design system colors alongside my alongside my typography styles. I believe Sketch is trying to head in this direction at some point. It's been really, really effective for the kind of stuff that we do. And you also end up with fewer styles that you actually have to maintain, because now you're not actually maintaining one variation for every typography difference. So I find it to be pretty good.
That's awesome. We do have one that's kind of related to what you're talking about as well. Another question: are there any plugins for importing XD files? The only thing that I personally know of is that XD to Sketch or XD to Figma website. I've been told by a few designers that that works more or less, but I'm not sure what you have to say about that, Anthony.
Yeah, and I'll be totally honest that it's an area that I haven't seen a ton of things personally on as well. Generally, I do find that more of the time that I'm spending with organizations is Sketch imports than it is XD imports. So I just personally don't have a ton of experience on that front. I know that we don't have anything built into the tool directly for XD files right now. Some best practices that I would just sort of recommend would be that if you have things that are not XD specific in the sense of like illustrations, iconography, layouts, grids, or anything like that, anything that can be exported to a program agnostic format like an SVG or actually SVG is probably going to be the best for any of that. You could have your grids, like let's say grids, for example, you could have those set up in XD. If you have them as actual vector elements, like maybe you can generate those somehow, export that, import that over here, and then you can quickly create some grids that way. Although I got to say, it's pretty easy to recreate grids using the grid styles that we have. So you can go in and just quickly create layout grids like that. But things like iconography, illustration, imagery, anything where you're not highly dependent on the program's specific architecture or specific understanding of it will be easy to bring in. Otherwise, I do find it's best to just sort of make yourself a good plan for how to go through and migrate components and things like that. Yeah, that's the extent of my knowledge on that front. So.
Yeah, my knowledge is a little lacking there, except for that one conversion website, which I really don't know how well it actually converts. I've been told it works. Two last questions for you, Anthony, just because you're right in it, so why not? Ernesto asks, can you create groups inside of a group like name/name/name? And from me, furthermore, can you kind of talk about components with that kind of a naming, but also styles with that kind of a naming?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, you absolutely can do subgroupings as well. One thing to note here, so if we do, again, this is an area where that design system organizer might actually show a little bit better representation than what you're going to get out of the platform by default. So for example, I'm actually just going to start in that plugin because I think it visually is going to show it a little bit better as well. If we have something like, let's say those color groupings those colors aren't in any group right now. If I were to put these all into a group, so let's just call this brand. So now I have my brand colors, and I know that this pink and blue are my accent colors. If I want to actually just say accent, so I now have a subgrouping of brand / accent. Again, you could just manually write that too. I'm just using the plugin because it helps speed things up quite a bit. Also makes renaming a lot faster, right? So I wouldn't have to rename this accent and this accent right here. I can just do them all at once by simply changing. Maybe they're not accents, maybe they're primary colors, right? So there we go. Now I got primaries. The thing to note though is that in the when you're actually using the style picker, you're gonna see those as separate groupings, but there isn't going to be any kind of like visual nesting, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like this isn't telling you that brand primary is inside of brand. So just keep that in mind, right? Like it's pulling them out as separate groups, but it doesn't have this nice sort of like tree architecture that you're going to see in the system organizer. So just something to note and keep an eye on. You can also use this tool. You can use the system organizer to actually apply styles as well. So you can actually, I believe that there's an application feature in this.
There's some kind of selection thing under the hood?
Yeah, I know that there's another plugin that you can use for this as well, another styling plugin that we can look at. But for the most part, I mean, I often find that that's enough of an organization breakup anyways, because now I actually know that these things are related to each other, and I have a tool where I can visually see that as well. So that same kind of subgrouping also does work for components, as Rogie mentioned as well. So like you could, we do support that same as Sketch, the / naming convention. So let's just say for a second, if we have, I'm just gonna say we've got an awesome component right here. This is just a little corgi button. Convert this into a component, name this button. If I just name this button, right, and if a good way to sort of see how your components are organized is if you go to the assets panel, you're going to see all of the components that you've created. So we've got this local component here. If I use / naming conventions, I can start to subgroup things quite a bit. So I could say something like maybe button corgi / corgi. So you'll see now this is actually now in a folder that is called button, right? Another way that you can actually do this even further is that if you use frames along with the / naming convention, that you'll actually get the frame names as part of the naming convention as well. If you only have one frame, you're going to see both the frame name and the button as the top level thing together. If I happened to have a second frame that also has another component inside of it, let's just say that, you'll see it's going to start actually separating those things out as well. Or I guess what I mean is that if I have another thing called button inside of this frame as well, you'll see the same thing take place. So frame one now separates out into frame one and frame one button. So like you get that same kind of separation, but it's not gonna like nest them inside of each other. They'll just be sort of at the same sibling layer like that. So you can use the / naming convention alongside the frame using frame names. You can even use page names for organization as well. I'm not going to attempt to go through all of that right now. There's a lot of great articles and some new live streams that I know Rogie is actually doing some stuff with this too. That go into some of the differences of trying to use these systems together. There are places where the systems can kind of clash. You'll get a little bit of redundancy sometimes. So that could be actually a great place where that design system organizer plugin, let's say you all of a sudden want to group a bunch of components inside of a frame, or you decide you want to get rid of a frame and now you're missing a layer of definition for what those two things are. If you pop into that design system organizer plugin, this thing also manages components in much the same way. So you'll see here that you can actually get that same kind of naming conventions. And what you can do is you can quickly regroup or ungroup or rename and help redefine those types of organizations. So again, we could probably do a whole hour just on that alone.
Yeah, oh, we could. And naming conventions and then naming for swaps and like fast swaps. Yes, there's a lot to talk about for sure. Mm-hmm. All right, well, I'm going to share screen now. Prabhav has asked if you could drop the article on that component organization, Anthony, that'd be awesome.
I will grab that.
And then I'll just kind of grab one little question here from Christian Baptiste, just to demonstrate here. He was asking about what do we do to like increase size on a font so quickly? I think it was something that Anthony demonstrated here. Let's just disconnect this thing here because I can't actually change this font size right now. So if I disconnect it, here's a couple of little pointers here. I can just tap the up button and down button on my my font size here, but I can also hold Shift as a modifier key, and that'll actually like bump it up by my nudge amount. And that nudge amount can be found right under here under Preferences Nudge Amount. So right now I have 8s because I like working in 8s because I think they're the best. But you can even change the small nudge. Little fun tip, you can even change that small nudge to like decimal values, so like 0.5 or 0.25 if you're working with like icons or something like that, where you want to just nudge those vector points around just by like half pixels. You could set yourself up on a pixel grid and then boom, mess with these nudge amounts. Super cool stuff. What I wanted to do is pick up where Anthony was at here. I'm going to take all these beautiful design system that Anthony has put together for me, and I want to share something. And if Anthony, you would share this link in there too. I want to share this automatic style guides plugin. So what this does is it takes local styles that you have already set up, like Anthony did with his design system organizer, as well as that Typescale, all those plugins. I'm going to just take everything that I have of local styles in this file and see if I can just give myself a starting point for a style guide. Rather than having to design everything, maybe this will give me a good starting point. So I'm going to come on into this file. No idea what the structure of this file is just yet, but I'm going to go ahead and just run automatic style guide generator here. Oops, let me see if I can do that again. There we go. Oh, we've got an update now. Okay. And it's actually not working for me. Oh, interesting. We just tried this. I wonder why it's now not working for me. All right, let me just see if I can bring this into a new file and see if I mess this up at all. We'll just try a new file here. We'll try running this plugin here. Automatic style guide. Okay, I must not have had this option here. So if I simply click generate, it'll say new page style guide has been created. Look under pages. So let me see what's under my pages here. What do I have? Style guide. Now you can see here that we have absolutely nothing. Let's see if we've actually imported our colors. We have not, of course. This is always something you'd love to see on stream when you rehearse before, and it works just fine. And now, of course, it will not work. Now this says update. I think it's already knowing that. There we go. Here we go. Automatic style guides generate. Let's see if we can do this now. Anthony, do you have any idea what's going on?
No idea. I wonder if it was because we ran and we did do a fair amount of testing in the file ahead of time. So I wonder if running update after running generate may not work as expected. So that might be a bug, something we can report to the plugin
Without
author.
a doubt. Could be something wrong with that. Yeah.
If you've got generate styles installed, you can go ahead and just generate those styles real quick in that file.
Let me see if I've got there. Let's try generate styles. Yeah. Style guide generator, or is it or it's styler, right?
Styler generate styles. Yeah, that should do it.
Right,
and you
so
just need to have those layers selected. Yep.
Look at this. I feel like you've taught me today. Thank you.
Yeah, and to the people who are mentioning that there are quite a few style guide generator plugins. I'm not advocating for this being the best one. It's just one that I've used consistently. So please feel free to drop links to any new styler plugins that are in there if you've got them. So.
Yep, without a doubt. So this one we're just going to breeze over really quickly. What this does is it takes everything that you have local styles in your document and just spits out a bunch of pages. Like untitled style guide, it'll actually put in frame names and things like that, and then it'll break it out into color styles, type styles, and all those kinds of things. So this should be, this is kind of a cool starting point. I would never advise taking this thing and be like, oh, this will just be the way that I generate my style guide. But it's just a good point of reference where you can actually just run this plugin and then see what comes from the outcome. And then you can sort of change that information how you see fit. Just a good starting point. The next one I want to share with you is one that's actually been developed by our boy, Tom Lowry. He's a designer advocate on our team. So let's say we've got some layout grids that we've added here. And so let's say we've got like a columnar grid, maybe that's a 12-column grid. It's got these margins and gutters on it. And let's say we're working with a few other grids as well. So maybe we have like a mobile grid. So I'm gonna go ahead and just add, let's just add like a iPhone 11 here. And let's say this grid here is, let's just say it's a row grid. No rhyme or reason here, but let's say we have a series of grids. I'll do one last one just so we can demonstrate the last type here, which is like a 8-pixel grid like this here. Now, the problem here is if you're documenting in your design system and you'd like to be able to show these grids, unfortunately, if I hit Control-G and turn my grids off, those things are invisible. So they're not going to be visible for the documentation of the design system. Now, sure, you could just say, oh, turn on grids to see the grids, but here's a helpful little assist for you. Let me grab that plugin here. It's called Layout Grid Visualizer. So if I just type in here, Layout Grid Visualizer, let's see what we find in the community here. Great, I've already got it installed. And let's see how easy this is. Let's hope it goes a little bit better than our last one. Layout Grid Visualizer. Now, if I just run this plugin on this frame with this grid, boom, you'll notice that that red darkens, and that's because that red is semi-opaque and it's actually stacking on top of the grid. Watch what happens now. If I turn off the grid, notice what's happened in here. We have a grid visualization, and then it's got all these things actually drawn out on the screen. Now you can actually put in little indicators and commentary and annotate, okay, it's gonna be a 32-pixel margin, it's gonna be this much for gutters, and you can actually give a visualization of these grids. Heck, you could even come in here and say, hey, I don't want that color. I want some vibrant, awesome purple. And of course, let's see if this works for multiple frames. I'm just going to type in Layout Grid Visualizer. And of course, Tom did a great job. I'm going to come in here, turn off those grids, and you can see that it actually just knows to go in and recreate all of these things as vector objects. So little handy thing in setting up your system for later. I don't want to pause too long on this because then we have a lot more to share. So I am going to hand this one on back to Anthony.
Awesome. Yeah, that grid one is super powerful. I recommend everyone go check out some of the cool stuff you can do with grids and snapping objects to different parts of the grids. When you have the grids enabled, you can do some really cool stuff with things like constraints can actually map to just edges of columns and not necessarily the edge of the entire screen. So you can get fixed gutters on resizable components and things like that. Rogie, I think you've actually done a stream on this or on parts of that. So pretty amazing stuff.
That was absolutely like a mind-blown moment for me. Like, and I've been using Figma for years, and I was like, are you kidding me? No way, no way. And just a quick, like, I'll do a real quick reshare. I just threw together this grid that we have here. And cross your fingers that this works. I'm going to turn on this grid. I'm going to get rid of this grid visualization. But all I've done is I've added this grid to this frame. And then I've got these two rectangles here. And I've set them up to their constraints to be left and right. So the hope here is that as I scale, notice that these boxes are staying perfectly aligned to their nearest. Even this one is not even fully on the grid item, but it's actually, or on the column, but you'll notice that it honors those grids, those gaps, those everything. And it's been such a really helpful thing when dealing with like a flexible layouts and flexible components.
Yeah, fluid grids with fixed gutters is something that you'll see a lot of times in web design, and to just have that be really easy is quite nice.
So nice.
Yeah. Cool. I'll take over. Awesome. So we could probably go on again for plugins for a while. We do want to show off some other stuff too, as far as some of the more interesting files that are out there too. So for anybody who is not currently in the beta, or maybe you saw our tweets that went out yesterday or the blog posts that we've launched, we are rolling out the community right now. So the community is an amazing place where you can, in fact, I'm gonna switch just to a different org real quick. There we go. What you're gonna do, what you'll be able to do here is that this is where you'll have access to plugins as you know them today, but also files created by everybody in the community. Again, a lot of people on the stream might already be aware of this, but and this is slowly going to get rolled out to everybody. We do have a brand new blog post on this as well if you're interested in just learning more about it. But these are files that have been created by either individuals or large organizations that they've made their work publicly available for you to use. When you go and you click on any one of these files, so the one that I actually was going to show off for us right now is GitHub's Primer. So Primer is their style guide. So again, you have to pick a cool name for your style guide if you're going to have one.
Oh, it's a must. It's a must.
Yeah, there's actually from Config 2020 back in February. Jules Forrest did a great talk on naming conventions for style guides and like what's working, and there's a lot of gravitation towards this idea of calling of while fun names can be very fun, and they are, and they get people excited and stuff like that, calling them design languages. It's a great talk that goes into lots of detail around things that work and what they're seeing to be effective. But what I wanted to show off was if you come into the community and you just search for anything, in this case, I'm just going to search for Primer. You'll see that these two GitHub files actually show up. I'm going to click on the Primer profile here. So people can have their own individual profiles in the community as well. And a lot of these larger organizations are actually setting up their style guides as multiple files. So this is much like how you think about it when you were decoupling it for building a design system, right? So you may have things like your primitives or your core or your atomic elements as a file that is separate from your components, which is, and again, you may even take that same concept and push it even further and have things where you break out for things like iconography or illustration or marketing or brand or anything like that. So what they've done here is they've actually published these files. If I click on one of these files here, you're going to see that I can quickly just duplicate this into my drafts and have a copy for myself where I can just explore it and understand how it's entirely put together. I highly recommend with the links that we drop in, people duplicate these files, check them out, see how they're built. That's going to be the best way to learn with a lot of this stuff too. So I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate a new copy of this into my drafts right now. Awesome. And the file that I'm starting in right now is called the primitives file. This is all of these styles that GitHub has set up. And they've done a few interesting things. You're going to see this in a lot of the examples that we're going to be showing off right now. But one of the things to note is the naming conventions that they've used for their pages. So they start with a cover. A cover basically gives you an opportunity to have a really nifty image in the community view for this kind of stuff, or in your actual own files as well. From there, the next page that you have is a getting started page. I'll note just another quick note on the cover thing. If you right click and say set as thumbnail, that will set it as a thumbnail. It won't, the resizing might look a little funny if you try to resize things, but at the same time, you won't have to make it your first page anymore. So that's just another approach to doing that. There's some great community files. Actually, Joey Banks put out an amazing one for setting up custom covers that you can definitely take a look at as well. But let's move on because I want to show off a couple of cool things that they do. So as from a style guide perspective, remember we were talking about how you, a big portion of a style guide is sort of that meta communication where you get to communicate directly to the people using the style guide. So here we actually have a whole page just on getting started information with how to enable the libraries, what our actual primitives look like, things like that. Again, this is getting into a little bit more of the execution piece, but really helpful information for any designer who's coming in to go use your system. They can now actually look and understand what's going on. From there, you'll see that there's pages for colors, border colors, background colors, typography. And this is a really interesting note, is that this file, if I click over to the Assets tab, there are no components in this file. This is entirely just styles. This is their primitives in that sense, in the sense that what they've done is they've actually set up a file that's just for their styles. And then they have that separate file, that web components file, which is where the components live. This allows you to just sort of keep some nice separation between the two. For anybody who's doing things, I saw we had a question come in around design tokens and how you might use those. I'm not going to go into too much depth on this, but there is a great plugin called Figma Tokens that will do a fair amount, which I apparently do not have installed on this one. But if you check out Figma Tokens, let's just go back to the community. I won't go into depth, but just so that in case anyone wants to follow up on this, Figma Tokens will actually, let's go to plugins. This will actually export from your styles, JSON, SCSS, if you're using Sass or YAML or any of those formats, which will actually get you a file out of the system. It isn't necessarily automated, meaning that if you make changes, you're going to have to push the update, but good to know about, and probably a good starting place for some of that cool stuff that's going on there. One other really amazing thing I love to call out in this file is how they've set up their containers and their ideas around spacing and things like that. So you'll see here that, again, they've got columns with gutters. They've got a few other interesting things around layouts, as far as like ensuring that you're designing for specific screen sizes. So in this case, you can see that there are some container sizes that they're using. There's an understanding of how these containers will resize in the code. So this is the sizes that they need to be designing for. This allows for, what's nice about this approach is that you get a little bit of not only responsive design, but also now I cannot for the life of me remember the word of it. Shoot, well, I'll have to come back to that one. But basically the idea that not only are things like stretching and changing, but you can actually change which content is most important. You can change the visual hierarchy of the information by reducing the number of screens you have to design for a fair amount. That's actually going to make things a little bit easier as far as how many screens you actually have to make, right? Because you kind of just want to, the idea here is that if we're all building the same product, the minimum amount of information that it takes to successfully communicate with your developers is the best approach to getting things shipped on time. So cut your screens down if you can, or have an understanding with your team as to like where there are breaking points for reflows and things like that. So one thing that I do want to show in here that I think is really fascinating that they've done is they've actually set up these spacer grids. So these are a little bit different than what I would call column grids or layout grids. So here, let's just try some examples over here. I'll show you what I mean. So if I create a frame, which is the same color, which is fine. Let me just actually give a little background color here so we can see our frame. Awesome. Very cool. So what you can do here is that if I turn on one of these grid styles, there are standard container styles, which will have columns and things like that applied to them, default columns, things like that. But these spacers are real interesting. So these spacers are, if I turn on one of these, let's turn on this 8 pixel spacer here, and I'm going to zoom in quite a bit so that we can actually see this. And I may go a step further and actually crack this open so we can actually see it. But if you can see here, there's a very, very light lines in the 4 corners that are giving me 8 pixels from each edge. If I resize this, I'm actually continuing to retain that 8 pixels from each edge. So almost like a safety zone or a margin or a gutter. They've got sizes set up for 16, 24. I'm going to break this connection so we can actually see what's going on here. So this is one, it's really cool. It's two different parts of the layout. One is a row column it's a single row that they're using for this, and then a single column that they're using for this. And I'm just going to bump up these colors so we can actually bump up this percentage here so that everybody can actually see what's going on here. Awesome.
Yeah, I love this. This could be so
Very
handy
cool.
for cards, for buttons, for all of
Right.
these
So you
things.
can see there that we actually retain those edges, especially for things when you have, if you're designing for systems that generally have an understanding of this concept, like edge-based design. So things like iOS design, Android design, you're using a lot of things where it's nearest edge because they're just a little bit different systems than using the 0, 0, top left corner, top right, bottom left models. They actually have a little bit more advanced approach to how you can do those types of things. Great way to get at that. So I love that one. One last thing on just the primer piece in general. Another interesting thing that they've done is that in their actual, so they have developer documentation too. So this is getting out of Figma, but what they've got is in their actual interface guidelines, so their actual publicly published development guide, they've got a whole section in much more depth about how they actually use this within Figma. So this is where I would say we're crossing that bridge away from maybe a style guide that's just very descriptive or declarative about how things are supposed to look. And this is starting to get into more of that how things are supposed to be used idea of it. And this accompanying documentation, having this kind of thing or ancillary materials that help just communicate a bit more, that's all huge increases to process, increases and clarity more than anything. And the increases to clarity is increases to speed, is shipping products faster and having happy teams. So seeing this kind of stuff always makes me really happy because it shows how much effort that there is going into the whole ecosystem, not just cool, here's your file, now go figure it out. So
Yeah, I love how it is sort of evolving the definition of a style guide, but in order to use all of these styles, all these components and things, like how can we communicate these things out? How can we create assists for people to be able to better understand them? So I love that the definition is changing a bit. We're not in the print days anymore, so I feel like we need to be a little bit more verbose and yeah, I've got a few examples. I'll keep my run pretty short, Anthony, just so we could have about 5-10 minutes at the end of this, just to, because we've got a slew of questions and I think
awesome.
these people are hungry for solutions from you. Okay, so I'll let Anthony share the links for this, but I'm just going to go ahead and jump into this Microsoft Fluent web UI kit design system sort of a thing. I don't want to call it a full design system. All I really want to express when I'm sharing these examples isn't that like, oh, check out this design system. It's more, check out this as a great way to start your style guide, to communicate to your team how to use the things that you've built within your component library. So first of all, we kind of see a little bit of something similar as to what we've seen with GitHub with their primer one. We've got a little bit of like a primer on like, hey, here's how you'll access these things. Not assuming that everyone knows how to bring in a team library. Here's what the assets panel looks like. And here's the kind of breakdown of our organization. And then of course, they even talk a little bit about their component architecture and how they're trying to keep things simple with that, which actually really helps if you're going to be on the design system, design team itself, to kind of know, hey, this is our methodology or philosophy for how we go about making components. And of course, they even go further to say, like, here's how you're going to swap out components. I think this is super great and super handy. One thing you may want to include is a change log. Just keep on tacking onto this page, make it an auto layout to make it easy, and just keep tacking on the new things that you've done. I love that. I love seeing that in here. Also, this is a really great like initial starting point for you. You can literally copy this file and then bring it over. What Microsoft has done here is notice they've actually created these little helper components like a color swatch. I'm not sure if they're going to use that in their product, but they're definitely using these little helper components for this design system documentation or this style guide. So I love how they've done that. They've got a really nice setup for just like outlining the headings and then like what sizes are these? What would we use these fonts for? And also they have links built in. So remember, we have that link feature in Figma that you can always just like link off to more a fuller set of documentation if you need it. Maybe it has like code guidelines or how to implement. You don't have to do that all in Figma. You can just link off there. So I really love this as an example of like just how to document. And I think I'll leave it at that. We don't want to get into all the other components and this and that, but it's just good to know that they've also done a really great job of organizing all of their colors here And a lot of their color naming really has semantic meaning in it. So things like here with gray, not so much, right? That's just color-based. But over here, we've got like type colors. So I know that this color should be used for typography and not just for anything. It's not just a black. It's, oh, this is the primary text color. Great. It's teaching me as I go along. So I feel like that's a really, really great example. Another good example that I was shocked to see how amazing it is this material theming in Android 10 file by Eduardo Prati. This thing is a treasure trove of like documentation prowess. Like I'm looking through these. I was looking through this like last week, and I was like, look at how amazing this is. Like everything is so documented out. It's documented out as to how to use your components, how you're going to theme. It's even got references to material designs like different code or names. So in this case, this is getting corners that are cut. One that I absolutely loved, I love this. Let me see if I can find the slider. I think this is a really good example of how you can actually document out your components. So show a screenshot of Figma, show a screenshot of the actual architecture. This is part of your design. And then show how you would use this. So how is this component used? Oh, I see. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go into this dynamic offset and adjust this auto layout, and that's gonna enable me to be able to use this thing. Now what's cool about this, they also did a GIF capture, and remember Figma does play GIFs. So if you actually view this thing in a prototype presentation mode, you can actually see like working with the component. I love this. I felt like it was just some nice little touches. So we'll share that file with you so it can be a great reference for you. But I think we'll go ahead and go on to Q&A. All right, Anthony, I think you're first, huh?
Sure.
Yeah, we had some at the beginning. I really want to honor some of those first questions that came in. Jeffrey asks, how do you handle component migration between files if you're handling larger product language systems?
Great question. So I'm going to take this as there's a few different ways that you could manage this. So right now there's this is interesting because there's a limitation that if you currently have a component, a main component in one file, to move that main component to another file is challenging. You'll get one of two things that will happen. One, either if you copy and paste the component, it's going to just show up as a brand new main component. Alternatively, if you actually have that component already published, you'll actually get an instance in the other file of that one, which is actually a great way to use sticker sheets if you think about it, because you could have one file where everything's published and just copy things out of it too, instead of if you've got full layouts and things like that. But the bigger question there, I think, is like, how do you migrate them to another file? The easiest way to do that right now is going to be to actually create a new main component in a new file. And then there are, in the edit menu, in fact, I'll just go ahead and share my screen here so we can look at this. There's a couple of approaches to this right now. There we go, share, awesome. If you've got components that you're trying to move from one file to another, in the edit menu, there's edit select all with same. So this is a quick way to select things with the same properties. You can quickly say select all with same instance. And when you do that, so like, let's say you have, let's just say you have a couple quick components right here or something like that, or just one quick component. If I say edit, select all with same instance, that's going to select everything that is that same instance at the same time. And then you can use the instance swapping menu to swap it for a new component that came from a different file. So if you had a new library published, or let's say you were breaking out components from one file to another, that'll quickly let you swap them. This will be on a file by file basis for the time being, but there is some stuff coming down the pipeline, so that I think I can just say stay tuned, and some of the stuff is going to get a little bit easier. So
Awesome. I'll just keep them coming, Anthony. You're doing great.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so how do you handle component instance updates? Do you detach so it doesn't bork any of your overrides?
Great question. I think updates is going to depend on, I like to think of it as like two separate types of updates. So And I think I even have an article that I can drop into the channel for this one as well. But I often think about updates in two ways. So let's say you're working on a design system, right? And you've got a V1 of your component that you've created. You're happy with it. Actually, let's say that this one right down here. And you've got maybe some text pieces to it or something. Actually, I wondered if I have something I can pull in real fast here. Maybe let's go with mobile native. Pretty sure that that's a library that's in here. Or how about just this material design system? That'll work. Material design kit. Great, cool. So if I were to just say pull in a button or something like that, or maybe a card example, if there's some cards in here, awesome. So I'm just going to grab this card right here, and I'm going to actually turn this into a main component real fast. Detach main component. Cool. So I basically just detached it, recreated it as a component because I just wanted to have a main component to work with for right now. If you have this component and you've published this and you're using this across multiple different files, there's lots of different instances all over the place. You have a couple of options as far as, and you've gotten to the point now where you're ready to update this component and you want to make some amount of changes to it. I like to bucket the changes into two formats, and I try to map this actually to something that people do in code quite a bit, which is like define your changes as either breaking or non-breaking, meaning that is this a small version change or is this a full version change, something like that, right? So if you have just small non-breaking changes, like perhaps you have stuff where you're not messing with the current text fields that are available, you're not messing with any of the layers that are necessarily there, you're doing additive work, meaning you're only creating new things, this will actually be a great way to, you can make small changes into the exact same component and actually push those changes out. Now, if you're making breaking changes, and this is where you can start to see overrides get changed, because overrides won't be preserved in a couple of reasons. Like one would be is that if you were to just simply remove entire parts of it, you're gonna lose that override data. Another way that this can happen is that if you swap these inner elements with other types of components, they may not technically count as the same component anymore, and you can lose overrides in that sense as well. So what I would do is I would consider those breaking changes to the point where I would actually create a brand new component and have a V1 and a V2 versus a V1 and a V1.1 or something like that. You can then begin to use some of the cool things within the system to help deprecate the V1. Again, this is one of those things that I think, and this is just a general thing I like about design systems, is that they're there to help elevate communication and collaboration, not to replace it, right? So the idea here is that you still want to empower your designers to understand which things they're supposed to be using and how they're supposed to be using it. So you could do a few things like, maybe with your V1, you actually start introducing some deprecation information. So you maybe in the naming conventions, you start to actually introduce visual cues that this is not something that you should be using, or maybe in a component description, you want to say, deprecated in 2 weeks, or however you have your deprecation system. There's a great talk by the Credit Karma team where they go into some of this detail on one of our In the Files with Joey Banks as well. From there, what you could do is that if you wanted to get really aggressive about this, you could start introducing actual visual deprecation on components as well. So like maybe you actually throw in some kind of layer on top of that component so that when people are actually using it in their designs, they're going to know, oh, geez, I'm using the wrong, really using the wrong one here. I also actually put out a tweet a couple days ago around you could use outer frames. Like let's say if you have a V1 and a V2, you can actually use containing frames to visually separate these out. So if we have these as components, maybe in our V1, we actually change the background color of this to be something more like that. And then V2 to be something more of a happier color, or use this color kind of a thing. We'll get rid of that little rectangle that I put in there as well, just to make it a little easier. Then in your assets panel, what you're gonna see is that when you actually look at those components, you're going to get some visual treatment behind them to actually help you visually call out different kind of components. But as far as preserving the overrides, it does come down to those breaking changes, I find, more than anything. So just be careful that if you are making drastic changes, I would swap out whole components, which again is going to be tricky to preserve any of them. So just make sure that I would really just, this is when you start getting down to layers of, it's going to be difficult for us to retain those because they have no relationship to each other anymore. There might be some plugins out there today that are trying to handle this. I know There's a couple component replacer plugins that can do some pretty fancy footwork with how they retain content layers. I'm not sure that last I checked, they did not work with published libraries, only with local components. So may or may not help with the solution, but that's sort of how I accomplished this today. So.
One thing too that Christian Baptiste added to this, his method for deprecating components is to change the opacity to 10%, and then he just uses the descriptions to tell the team to change an upgraded version. I like that. I like the overlay thing. Like then if for some reason a designer brings in a deprecated component, then they'll see that like, okay, this thing's blocked. So the 10% opacity thing works, or like a big red block that says like, use with caution. We're not encouraging this. So those are great. I think we probably have time for one question, and I'm going to ask you to reshare again. It's from Juliana. I tried to answer her question, but it says, what happens to the overrides if you swap instances of components? Sometimes those overrides get lost. And so if you could just showcase like what overrides get lost, Anthony, and kind of ways to, if you're going to a V2 of a component, ways to kind of make sure that they don't get lost, those overrides, that would be awesome.
Yeah, and to be totally candid with this is an area where you're going to hit some friction right now in our system. There is again, similar to the piece earlier around moving components between files, there is some great stuff in the works as to make this a little bit easier, but you are going to find instances where, and let me see if I can just pop an icon in here real quick too. Let's see if we have an icon that I can grab. Awesome here. I find this to be a pretty practical example for this. Let's detach this. Pop this icon in here. Maybe I can actually do this as a model layout. Oh, no, it's going to give me the other format because I have so many layers going on in here. We'll just do it like that for now. That'll work just fine. Cool. So I've got a raised button component with something where I may want to swap out items inside of it. So a really cool trick, let's just look at a quick override, a pretty common type of override that I often see, which is swapping out iconography within a button or something like that. So what you would do is, you may or may not be familiar with this, which is that if you drag something from the assets panel and you hold down the option key, you can actually swap out top level components. Now this isn't going to be what we want. You'll see if I do this, it's going to actually swap that whole button out. But if you hold down Option and Command, you can actually swap out inner components super fast like this. Like it's a super quick way to do it. The other super fast way is just go to the Swap Instance menu by right-clicking, because you'll get just the subgroup of all the related components, which is another quick way to do that. That works fine for when you have things that are all the same color. But let's say we actually had set an override on this, right? So let's say we had actually set the color of this to be something a little bit different, maybe like a bright yellow like that. You're going to see an issue here when we try to preserve this override. If I swap out this button, we're going to get this kind of problem occurring, right? This is a known issue in the system today, and the team is very, very much aware of it. It's something that we are certainly putting energy into right now. A couple solutions that I've seen be pretty successful for the time being is, let's go from biggest to smallest. Like on the most practical scale that I can think of is that if these are a small set of colors or a small set of things that you're constantly switching out, I highly recommend maybe even just setting those up as components in your design system. You can use I still kind of steer away from these days, but there's the very traditional method, and something that I used to do in Sketch all the time too, which is that you set up color masks and you actually have those set up as things that you can swap out. So the mask itself doesn't ever change, but you're just swapping the component underneath the mask. That's another great technique for doing this. Alternatively, you could also wrap local components for yourself. So you could do this where you set this up in such a way that what you're actually swapping out is not the icon itself, but you're swapping out, what you're doing is you actually nested these inside of another component called like icon component. And then if you set the default color of icon component, any of the icons that you swap out underneath will retain that color. Again, it's very similar to the masking approach, but it's another way to do that. Very traditional method, I find. I'm really pushing for preserving color overrides in particular. Text overrides, for the most part, will be preserved when you switch between components, if you have matching layer names and things like that. I don't recommend using the hidden layers for different variants of components, because those will technically count as different text fields and they will not retain if you switch between them. So just a good note. And then lastly, The last way to do it would be is if you're working with a larger library and you know you're working on a design file where you're going to consistently need to use a subset of those in specific colors, I would say go ahead and set yourself up some local components with those, right? So you could just take these components, wrap these in a new component, and set your override. If for any reason that icon changes, in that case, your override is actually going to get preserved because you're working with the override on a new component. Now, this can be dangerous in larger systems because now you've wrapped your component, you changed the underlying architecture of the component. If you know what you're doing and you're in control of that system, that's totally fine. But just keep in mind that if you're working with other designers, you may want to be careful there, or just have strong communication between you as well. So.
Yeah, and one additional, and I think you kind of alluded to this or already talked about it, Anthony, but one potential method, if you're in a system with icons where you really only have like 2 color variants, if there's like one on a primary button, the color of an icon on a primary button, and then say the color of an icon on some other button. So say there's like a light variety and a dark, you can design them in the dark and then wrapper component, put a wrapper component around, or just make a component out of one with an override on it to be light. Then if you ever change that underlying icon, it'll still change the other one, but you can keep both those 2 color variants, and then you would just, when you're actually swapping out your icons, you would just swap out for light or dark. If that's how your design system works, maybe you have like multicolor icons and everything's very different, but if that works for you, that is a method.
Mm-hmm. Or another approach that we'll often see is there are a few plugins out there now for specifically around theming. So like Tom Lowry's Themer plugin will allow you to actually swap entire sets of styles, which could be another way to approach that, right? Like let's say you're working in a file where you're using a different brand color, but you only have your icons in black or white or something like that. That will actually take whatever semantic style you've applied to them. Like let's say it's called icon color accent or icon color primary, and swap it for whatever other set that you have. Again, it's more relying on plugins than in the tool. But yeah, to get back to the original question, it's a known pain point for us today. So.
Well, I think that's it. We went late, but we couldn't get through all your questions. Thank you for all of your really amazing questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but also Anthony, thanks for being on this with me. I always love having you, and you know a lot, so thank you.
Love being here. Thank you, and thanks everybody.